Welcome to Thread of Terror. We bring you the creepiest stories from Reddit. Dim the lights, grab a blanket, and hit subscribe so you never miss a scare. What's the scariest dream you ever had? I mean, one so chilling it stayed with you. Story 1. Terrifying sleep paralysis.
I used to experience severe sleep paralysis, and one night I had an experience that still haunts me. In my room there is an old wooden rocking chair that I've always found somewhat eerie. One evening I had an episode and my eyes fluttered open, though I was still lying on my back. My head was turned toward the rocking chair. There, sitting in the chair, was a woman. She had pale grey skin, and her blonde hair cascaded down her shoulders. She was crying uncontrollably, her face contorted in despair. And what made it even worse was the fact that she was staring directly at me. As if in some kind of twisted trance, she began pulling out her insides, her hands moving violently, tearing at herself. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear. I tried to close my eyes, but the image was still burned into my mind. Then I felt it. The pressure on my chest, that familiar sensation that often comes with sleep paralysis. Suddenly it felt as though she was sitting on me, still pulling her insides out, now spilling them across my chest as she wept. I could feel the wetness and the coldness of her touch, and I was so terrified that I actually wet the bed. I was 20 years old at the time. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. Everything felt so real, but I knew I was trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't escape from. That wasn't the only terrifying experience I've had. Last year, I had another one that was even worse. It always happened in the same way, with 3 distinct rolls. My eyes would flutter open, and I'd find myself facing one side of the room, like I usually do when I sleep on my side. But something would feel off. I'd feel someone blowing on the back of my neck, and I'd panic, convinced someone was in my room. I always lock my door before I sleep, so I was sure no one was supposed to be there. The air felt cold against my skin, but when I tried to move, I couldn't. After that, I'd fall asleep again, rolling over to face the other side. But then it happened again. Someone blowing on the back of my neck. By the 3rd roll, I was facing the dark corner of the room, where a hooded figure stood. I couldn't make out its face, just a dark shape. It was blowing directly onto my face now, its presence suffocating, and I felt a sense of overwhelming dread. I wanted to scream, to do anything to make it stop, but no sound came out. In an instant, the figure floated backwards with frightening speed into my closet. It just stared at me from the shadows. I lay there, paralyzed, staring back until I finally fell asleep. This same thing happened every night for about 2 weeks. I never got used to it. It was always just as terrifying.
Story 2. Recurring dreams of a dying girl.
When I was around 14 years old, I started having these recurring dreams that always seemed to feel the same, yet each one left me with an unsettling sense of dread. In each dream, I found myself sitting cross-legged in front of a temple. I was holding a small girl in my lap, and everything around us was in black and white, giving the whole scene a dreamlike, surreal quality. The girl was small, with pale skin, dressed in a simple white dress. Her long black hair cascaded around her shoulders, and she looked so innocent, so fragile. Despite the serene appearance, something in the dream told me that she was slowly dying in my arms. Every time I had the dream, it felt as if I was helplessly watching her life slip away. As the dreams went on, I noticed a chilling pattern. With each recurrence, the girl appeared more and more lifeless. She seemed to grow weaker with every passing moment. The look in her eyes, once filled with innocence, began to fade, replaced with a sadness I couldn't escape. What disturbed me the most, however, was the overwhelming, agonizing feeling that there was something I could do to prevent it. I knew I should have been able to stop what was happening, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't figure out what I needed to do to save her. It was as if I was locked in a loop, watching her slip away without any control over the outcome. The worst moment came when in one of the dreams she finally died in my arms. I could feel her body go cold, and in that instant, I knew it was over. That was the last time I ever had that dream. The dream stopped, but the feeling of failure never left me. Even now, I can't shake the thought that I somehow failed her, that there was something I could have done to change the course of events, but I just couldn't figure it out in time. The sense of loss lingers, as if I had been responsible for her fate.
Story 3. Nightmare of Screaming Thoughts.
The dream itself wasn't scary, but the unsettling feeling it left behind has stuck with me, and over time, it has become something I fear. Let me explain what happened. I remember being entangled in what seemed like millions of smooth, shiny wires. I was completely trapped. The panic of being unable to move set in, something that reminded me of claustrophobia. Then it hit me, the overwhelming feeling that every thought I had was being screamed at me, but inside my own head. It was as though someone had turned the volume of my thoughts up to full blast. It was one of the most unsettling and worst feelings I've ever had, and it's difficult to explain. The strangest part is that once I woke up, whatever this was persisted for a while. I can best explain it with an analogy. It felt like normally my thoughts are just a person speaking calmly and quietly in my head. But during the dream and shortly afterward, it felt like this person was screaming at me, their voice overwhelming and constant. Now, I don't mean to say that there's a person inside my head who tells me my thoughts. That would be silly. This is just the best way I can think of to explain it. It has since happened a few times without the dream triggering it, and I have yet to understand what it is or why it happens. What I do know is that this dream has haunted me for over 10 years because of the inexplicable, terrifyingly awful feeling it caused. I'd also like to add that I remember it almost feeling like I was hearing something loud too, like the sensation of pressure in your ear. It's hard to explain. I really wish there were a page or something that could help make sense of this.
Story 4. Dream of Terror.
The dream I had when I was 4 years old still sticks with me to this day, even though nearly 20 years have passed. I remember it vividly, though I wish I could forget it. It all took place in what seemed like my elementary school campus, though it felt surreal, like a distorted version of it. I was running down a long dark hallway, terrified when I saw him. A troll, but not just any troll, the kind with colourful hair and a jewel embedded in his belly button, like a twisted version of the toys I used to see around. He was towering, about 6 feet tall, and he was holding a knife against my mother's throat. The troll's laughter was bone-chilling, echoing through the halls. and it made my heart race. The sound of his laughter still rings in my ears even now. And then he did something that made my blood run cold. He slit my mother's throat right in front of me. I could see the life draining from her eyes, her body going limp as he held her severed head in his hand. Her decapitated body twitched violently on the floor, and I could feel the horror and helplessness, like I was experiencing it in real life. He dropped her head casually onto the floor, as if it meant nothing, and started to turn toward me. A wave of terror washed over me, as I knew he was coming for me next. Without thinking, I spun around and ran as fast as I could, my little legs carrying me as quickly as they could. But just as I thought I had escaped, I felt something cold and strong grip my ankle. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. That's when I woke up, gasping for air, drenched in sweat, and still terrified, even though I was safe in my bed. Even now, I think about that dream more times than I'd like to admit, and the chilling feeling it gave me has never really gone away. I don't know why that dream haunted me so much, but I can still vividly picture that troll and the horror of seeing my mother in danger.
Story 5. Chased by Darkness.
After this nightmare, I couldn't sleep for a week. When Inception came out, my friends and I joked that Hollywood had stolen my dream and made it into a movie. It is night, and I am running through the canyon behind my house. There is black vegetation looming around me on either side of the path, which faintly reflects the whiteness of the moonlight. The stark contrast of the light and dark emphasizes the impossible straightness of the path. I am running and running when suddenly I am stopped in my tracks by her. Now, everything is dim except for her. She is glowing, mysteriously white, beautiful, and terrifying. She smiles. I am running away and running away until I wake up in a cold sweat. It was just a dream. It is still dark, but I decide to roll over and get out of bed. I scream. She is there, standing above my bed, smiling. I dash out of my room, down the stairs, out the garage, feet pummeling asphalt as I run down the road away. But then she is there in front of me again, smiling. Scared out of my wits, I stop and I wake up in a cold sweat. It was just a dream. It is dark, but I decide to roll over and get out of bed. I scream. She is there again, standing above my bed, smiling. I dash out of my room, down the stairs, out the garage, feet pummeling asphalt as I run down the road away. But then she is there in front of me again, smiling. Scared out of my wits, I stop. She glides away and begins to smile at and talk to a group of my friends on the side of the road. I try to scream at them, and I wake up in a cold sweat. It was just a dream. It is dark, but I decide to roll over and get out of bed. I scream. She is there again, standing above my bed, smiling. I dash out of my room, down the stairs, out the garage, feet pummeling asphalt as I run down the road away. But then she is there standing with my friends, smiling and talking. I try to warn them, but she turns to smile at me and I wake up in a cold sweat. It was just a dream. A long, disturbing dream, but just a dream. It is dark, but I decide to grab my laptop and talk to a friend about this. I almost expect her to be there, but she is not. I start up my laptop and then begin chatting with a friend, asking if he knows anything about this sort of creature. He says he has these dreams too, but it is a different person, the smiling boy that befriends his friends. Oh no, this is real. She and he are both some sort of real vampire. What do I do? Then I remember the girl is real, and I know her. Maybe she can help. I start chatting with her and relax. They were just disturbing dreams, and I am probably just overly stressed from school. She comforts me and asks me if I can pinpoint the cause of these dreams. I ponder this for a bit and remember that this seems to have all begun when my mother hung up a mosaic of a house above my bed. I speculate that it might have inspired these dreams. I snap a photograph of it and send it to her, asking her what she thought of it. She does not respond for a while, but after a long pause, she asks, "Why do you have a mosaic of my house?" My head spins, mouth agape. My head whips back to the mosaic. I whimper. There is a small figure in the doorway of the house. It was not there before. Chilled to the bone, I scramble out of my room and down the hallway, only to be confronted by the same damned mosaic. I scream silently when I notice that the figure is slightly larger and closer. I keep running, but my house is now a maze, and every corner the mosaic appears. Every time I nearly run into the mosaic, the figure is nearer, more threatening. I am at my wit's end, on the brink of losing my sanity out of sheer terror. I halt dead in my tracks in front of another wall, and now the figure is life-sized and looming in the mosaic. The figure moves. It leaps out, and I wake up screaming and crying.
Story 6. The Red Mist.
It started out like any other evening, with my family gathered in the living room, chatting and enjoying the usual moments of togetherness. My brother, with his short buzz cut, was joking around as he got up to leave. He casually mentioned that he was heading to the garage to shave his head with the belt sander. At the time, the absurdity of it seemed oddly fitting within the logic of the dream, as if it made sense. He wasn't one to make many decisions that seemed entirely rational, but for some reason, that didn't strike me as strange. A few moments passed and the air in the room started to feel dense, like something was terribly off. Suddenly, a fine red mist began to spray from the ventilation duct in the ceiling above us. I could barely register the sound of it at first, but then there was a sudden, eerie silence, followed by blood slowly dripping from the vent. It soaked through the ceiling, streaking downward in a line, unmistakably coming from the direction of the garage. I froze, trying to comprehend what was happening. Panic set in as my parents and I rushed towards the garage. We threw open the door, and what we saw will haunt me forever. My brother's head had been caught in the belt sander. The machine had caused a horrific injury, leaving him with severe damage. But it didn't end there. The force of the sander had thrown him sideways with a terrifying violence, propelling him directly into the bandsaw. The saw immediately caused a devastating injury, severing his head from his body and also cutting off his hand in one clean motion. Blood poured out from his neck and arm in a continuous spray, mixing with pieces of his skin. His body unnervingly kept standing, stiffly twitching in a grotesque and unnatural way, as if the very essence of life was struggling to hold on. The worst part was the dust collection system. It had been activated by the chaos of the accident, and now the blood, the shredded skin, and other bits of his face were sucked into the system. The gore was being spread throughout the house, carried through the vents, like a horrifying storm of death, misting through every room. It was everywhere. The smell, the sight, the overwhelming sense of something horribly wrong. Everything felt too real. I woke up, gasping for air, in a cold sweat. The remnants of the nightmare lingered, and I had to force myself to resist the impulse to call my brother in the middle of the night, just to make sure he was still alive. The terror that gripped me was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. The smell of blood, the way it misted through the air, and the gut-wrenching feeling that something had gone horribly wrong, but I was already too late. Those images have been burned into my mind. Even now I can still feel that sickening, stomach-sinking sensation, as though it all might happen again.
Story 7. Dead people eating my hair.
A few months ago, I had the weirdest dream. I found myself in a living room with a group of people who looked like hipsters. The room had old couches, rugs, and a beat-up coffee table, looking pretty normal at first glance. But as I looked around, I realized something was off. It was actually a morgue. One whole wall was lined with those cabinet drawers that they keep dead bodies in, but instead of being metal, they were made of glass or plastic so you could see inside. The other walls were bare concrete. We were all just chatting casually with coffee cups scattered around the table. One person was playing with a Rubik's Cube, but at random moments during the conversation, one of the drawers would fly open, and out would come a dead person with a horribly disfigured, bloody face joining in the discussion. At one point, the guy with the Rubik's Cube was trying to fit it into one of the coffee cups, his smile fading as he realized it wouldn't fit. It reminded me of a toddler trying to force shapes into those boxes with pegs. Frustrated, he threw the Rubik's Cube, and it bounced off the table, hitting me in the face. Then, things took a turn for the worse. The group started throwing ceramic coffee cups at me, and once those were all gone, they made me pull out my hair in small handfuls. As soon as I finished, all the drawers on the wall flew open at once, and the dead people rushed out and began eating my hair. It might not sound that creepy, but when I woke up, I was screaming and terrified.
Story 8. The basement.
I used to live in a house in an older part of town, the kind of place that felt like it had secrets in every corner. The house was fascinating in a way, filled with trapdoors, secret passageways, and all sorts of hidden nooks and crannies that seemed designed to fuel a child's imagination. But for all its charm, I am quite sure it was haunted. I had several unsettling experiences there as a kid, and even now, the memories of those recurring dreams are as vivid as ever. The first dream began when I was about 7 or 8 years old. In the dream, I was sitting at our living room coffee table, completely absorbed in drawing. The house was eerily quiet. No one else was home except for my infant brother, who was in the kitchen, peacefully sitting in his little rocking swing chair. As I drew, the silence began to feel heavy, like the air itself was pressing down on me. Then, out of nowhere, people began emerging from the basement. One by one, they passed my brother in the kitchen, walked right past me without a word, and headed straight out the front door. What struck me was how many there were, a seemingly endless procession of strangers. I had no idea who they were or where they had come from, but they just kept coming. Some were dressed in old-fashioned clothing, others in clothes that seemed modern but unfamiliar, as though they did not belong to my time. None of them looked at me, spoke, or even acknowledged me. It was as if they were driven by some unseen force, their steps purposeful yet hauntingly silent. I sat frozen, unable to move, just watching this mass exodus from the basement. This dream repeated several times over the years, and each time it left me with an unshakable sense of dread. Even now I can recall the way the figures moved, their faces blurry and indistinct, like shadows in human form. The second dream started a couple of years later when I was around 10. By then I had become braver about exploring the house, even the parts that felt strange. In this dream I was adventuring through the house, wandering through the kitchen, then the laundry room, and finally into the carpet, heading toward the basement. Everything felt normal as I approached the door to the basement, but as soon as I opened it, reality seemed to shift. Instead of the usual basement floor, there was a gaping, bottomless pit stretching endlessly below me. It was a vast, dark void, so deep that I could not see the bottom. The only thing breaking the emptiness were ladders, dozens of them, crisscrossing the pit at odd angles. They seemed to lead to different levels, as though there were hidden chambers or worlds buried deep within the pit. I stood there, staring down into the abyss, unable to move. The ladders looked both inviting and terrifying, as if they were daring me to climb down and discover what lay beneath. But the sheer depth of the pit filled me with a paralyzing fear, and I knew that whatever was down there was not something I wanted to encounter. Strangely enough, both of these dreams happened before I ever got trapped in the basement in real life, an event that solidified my belief that something about that house was not quite right. Even as an adult, I sometimes wonder if those dreams were warnings, trying to tell me something about the house and its hidden depths.
Story 9. Faceless Man.
When I was younger, probably around 8 or 9, I had a dream that has haunted me for years. It started innocently enough. I was in my room with 3 friends, just hanging out late at night. The 4 of us were gathered around an old Fisher-Price picnic bench, and sitting on it was this ancient radio. It was one of those big, bulky models you might see in a black and white movie. Strangely, it was tuned to a station playing what my mind imagined as early 1930s talk radio. Thinking back now, the voice and tone were probably inspired by some old Disney VHS cartoons I used to watch. The radio even sounded like one of those chattering, slightly cartoonish voices from those shows. At first it was just background noise, but then the radio started broadcasting something terrifying. The voice warned us about a group of highly dangerous criminals who were moving from house to house, targeting families. The way to know if they were coming to your house was through a peculiar signal from the radio. It would emit this deeply unsettling 2-tone buzz. The first was a low, droning sound that lasted about 3 seconds, followed by an even deeper, more ominous buzz that stretched for another 3 to 4 seconds. It was unlike any sound I had ever heard before or since, and it is burned into my memory. Even now I cannot describe it fully, but the moment I hear anything remotely similar, it sends chills down my spine. In the dream, the radio suddenly made that sound. A cold wave of dread washed over us as we froze in fear. Then, chaos broke loose. The four of us scattered, running to hide in different parts of the house. It was eerily empty. No adults, no one to help us. The house felt massive and hollow, the walls amplifying every tiny sound. As I darted to my hiding spot, I could hear them, whoever they were, entering the house. Heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed through the halls, growing louder with every passing second. I chose to hide under a small table in my mother's room, curling into the tightest ball I could manage. My breathing was shallow, and my heart pounded so loudly that I was sure it would give me away. From my hiding spot, I could hear the screams of my friends as one by one they were discovered. The sounds were horrifying, pleas for help, muffled cries, and then silence. It was as though they had been taken away, but to where, I could not imagine. The radio, meanwhile, continued to play that awful two-tone buzz, over and over like a grim countdown. I dared not move even as the footsteps approached my hiding spot. Then I saw them. A pair of feet stopped right in front of the table. The man's shoes were worn and scuffed, as though they had walked miles through something unspeakable. He stood there for what felt like an eternity before slowly turning and walking away. Relief surged through me. Maybe he had not seen me. But just as I was about to breathe, he stopped. The footsteps turned back, and then he leaned down, bringing his face or lack of one into view. He was faceless, completely void of features, as if someone had smoothed over his entire head with clay. And then he spoke. His voice was deep, modulated, almost demonic. "Hello," he said, calling me by name. "You are going to come with me for a while." The sheer terror of that moment is something I cannot put into words. He reached out and grabbed my hand. His grip was ice cold, and the second his hand touched mine, I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing as though I had been running for my life. The nightmare itself would have been enough, but what makes it truly horrifying is how it has lingered. Anytime I hear a radio in a dream, even if the dream is completely unrelated, if it makes that distinct two-tone noise, the dream instantly transforms back into this one. I become fully aware that it is the same nightmare, but no matter how hard I try, I cannot wake myself up. I am forced to relive the horror, hiding under the table, hearing my friends scream, and watching as that faceless man comes for me again. This has been happening once a year, every year, for the last 15 years. I do not know why, but I would not wish this experience on anyone.
Story 10. Creepy Old Woman.
There used to be a wonderful pizza place about a mile away called Capozzi's. Their pizza was amazing, absolutely unforgettable, but I digress. In my dream, Capozzi's had switched locations with a $5 Polish hair salon 2 apartment buildings away. In the dream, I was walking away from the relocated Capozzi's, feeling unusually happy, heading back to my 3rd-story apartment. I vividly remember wearing a baby doll dress. though this realization did not come from looking down at myself. Instead, it was as if my perspective zoomed out, like a camera following me as I walked down the street. When I got back to the apartment, I noticed my now ex-girlfriend in the bathroom, putting on her makeup. I walked in and sat on the toilet, half watching her and half gazing into the dining room and kitchen. I do not remember exactly what we were talking about, but she seemed annoyed with me for some reason. That was when I saw her. A figure, an old woman, dirty and unsettling, appeared in the kitchen near the stove. She did not belong in our apartment. I had never seen her before, and I could not figure out how she had gotten in. She stood there, grinning eerily, her teeth bared in a way that sent chills down my spine. I immediately told my ex that someone was in the kitchen, but she dismissed me, saying there was no one there, and accusing me of trying to mess with her. I glanced back into the kitchen, and the old woman had moved closer, now standing by the sink. I started panicking, begging my ex to look, to see what I was seeing. But she kept brushing me off, telling me to stop making things up and let her finish her makeup. Meanwhile, the old woman just stood there, her grin never fading. Every time I looked away from her to plead with my ex, the woman moved closer. It was like something out of a nightmare, like those statues from Doctor Who, the weeping angels, that move when you are not looking. I was growing hysterical, trying desperately to convince my ex that there was someone in the apartment. The old woman kept creeping closer, step by step. My heart was racing, my breath shallow, and my tears started falling. But my ex refused to look. Then I turned back to the old woman, and she was there right in the doorway of the bathroom. Her hand reached out toward me, inches away from grabbing me. I woke up instantly, gasping for air and drenched in fear. Without thinking, I curled into my current boyfriend, clutching his shirt tightly. He woke up slightly, startled by my actions, and asked what was wrong. I could not even explain. I just started crying uncontrollably, overwhelmed by the terror that lingered. I do not remember sleeping again that night. The dream has stayed with me ever since.
Thanks for joining us on this terrifying adventure. If tonight's story gave you chills, let us know in the comments below and share your own scary experiences too. Don't forget to leave a like if you want more nightmares and subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, sleep tight and remember, not all shadows are empty.